Hello, this is Eastern Europe Review, the common project of Belsat and TVP World, with the reports and analysis from Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. I'm Alexandra Shapalina, and these are the main stories. What's new in the closer military cooperation of Minsk and Moscow?
We see that the military industry is working almost 24/7.
How does the Lukashenka regime suffer from staff shortages because of the political prosecution?
In its current state, the economy of Belarus can't provide employment even in the volume that it provided a year ago.
How do people live without heating in Russian big cities?
We talk about this all the time. People need to be rehoused from the slums.
The Ukrainian military and officials say that at the moment there is no direct threat of Russia's attack on Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. However, the Lukashenko regime is looking for other ways to assist Putin in his bloody plans. Not only do they train and equip Russian soldiers, but also the Belarusian military industry is starting to work really hard for Russian Federation. What's new in the closer military cooperation of Minsk and Moscow?
The head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kirill Budanov, says that the rumors about the new attack of Russia on Ukraine from the territory of Belarus echo Russian special military information. The goal is to create panic in Ukrainian society, distract the military forces of Ukraine from hostilities in the east and south of the country, and keep more troops at the border with Belarus.
Russia certainly takes real action to cover up this propaganda operation. For example, part of the divisions that can use Iskander missile systems were deployed to Belarus.
At the same time, on December the 3rd, at the meeting with Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Lukashenka signed another agreement on closer military cooperation between Minsk and Moscow.
We will do everything that Belarusians have to do according to the agreement. Do not doubt it. We are not hiding in the bushes here. We have openly stated our position.
The signing of the secret agreement was attended by the Deputy Prime Minister of Belarus, the former Ministry of Industry Pyotr Parhamchik, and the chairman of the State Military Industry Committee, Dmitry Pantus. These people are personally responsible for the military industry in Belarus, which means that Belarus can be involved in the production and repair of military equipment for Russia. There have already been reports that Belarusian enterprises have been involved in such activities.
According to insider information, the parties discussed the possible production of Polonaise multiple launch rocket systems for Russia. Please note that before his death, Belarusian Foreign Minister Uladzimir Makei had made one of his last visits to Tehran. Later, Prime Minister Roman Halychanka visited Iran. We have information that Iranian drones are already being assembled in Belarus and will be tested soon.
Russia might be interested in the mass production of Belarusian multiple rocket systems Polonaise for its needs. The maximum firing range of the Polonaise is 300 kilometers. In recent years, Belarusian military industry has been successful in the production of the missiles. Originally, Polonaise fired the Chinese A-200 missiles with a range of 200 kilometers. But even the Belarusian army has no more than 20 of the MLRSs, so any mass deliveries to Russia are just impossible. Belarus has already exported these weapons to Azerbaijan, but this delivery was prepaid, so the production of new systems for Russia will require huge investment and time.
We see that the military industry is working almost 24/7. Military clothes and shoes are being produced in 3 shifts.
At the same time, Russia continues to take the ammunition for different kinds of artillery as well as tanks T-72A from Belarusian military stocks.
I don't think that the Belarusian military industry is ready to satisfy the demand of the Russian Federation. Otherwise, Moscow would not have ordered the uniforms from North Korea, and they wouldn't bring ammunition from Iran and China.
At the same time, the preparations of the Russian troops continue in Belarus. The Tor M2 SAM were brought to a training ground near Baranovichi, which means that air defense troops will be trained in Belarus as well, together with artillery and motorized infantry units. What is more, the troops formed from the representatives of the occupied territories of Ukraine may be present in Belarus at the moment, as a flag of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic could be seen on the video taken during one of the trainings. So the new agreement with Russia could have just been a documentation of the already existing Russian military presence in Belarus.
Knowing his system from the inside, Lukashenka wants to have everything recorded on paper. It was fundamentally important for him to sign this agreement, because in his eyes, it actually legalizes his activities. Again, he didn't sign the document himself. His defense minister Viktor Hrenin did. You could see how bad Hrenin's face looked when he exchanged folders with Russian defense minister Shoigu. Russia has always treated Lukashenka as a vassal. He is treated as a representative of the region. An interesting thing, in this agreement, the definition regions is used. The regions are the territory of the Republic of Belarus and the territory of subjects of the Russian Federation.
The Kremlin is treating Belarus as part of Russia and is trying to use the Lukashenko regime in all possible ways in order to continue a brutal war against Ukraine.
Employers in Belarus dismiss more often than they employ, and this is already a trend. The National Statistical Committee reported that this year 65,000 more workers were laid off than employed. The officials are trying to solve the personnel issue, but their proposals look desperate and still ineffective.
According to the National Statistical Committee, the number of workers in Belarus has decreased by almost 65,500 in the first 10 months of the year. During this time, more than 546,000 people were employed, but more than 612,000 were dismissed.
This fully corresponds to the general trend of economic recession in Belarus, which at the macro level is characterized by a drop in the country's gross domestic product by almost 5%.
Minsk automobile plant, the titular enterprise of the Belarusian regime. According to official data, in 2020, more than 14,000 people worked there. Another flagship company of Belarusian production, Minsk tractor plant, employs almost 15,500 workers. Finally, Belsat, Belarusian automobile plant in Zhodina, 10,600. Thus, almost over 40,000 people work at the three flagship enterprises of the Belarusian automobile industry. In other words, in 1 year, Belarus has lost the number of workers comparable to 4 large state-funded enterprises.
In its current state, the economy of Belarus can't provide employment even in the volume that it provided a year ago.
Official statistics say that the main reason for dismissal this year is not even economic. First of all, people lose their jobs because of, as it is called here, a violation of the labor code of conduct. In today's Belarus, this means being blacklisted as disloyal to their government. This is an element of repression tantamount to imprisonment.
People are afraid to speak openly, visit certain websites, because at any moment it can turn into a dismissal, detention, arrest, or criminal prosecution.
According to the Republican database of vacancies and resumes, for example, medical institutions currently lack about 6,300 doctors, and the number of vacancies is constantly growing. But even if the situation turns into a critical one, politically unreliable healthcare workers won't be hired. The so-called ban on the profession is spreading more and more in the country.
In general, I see that the authorities aren't worried about this much. It's more important for them to ensure that in the organizations everyone is loyal, but not the normal functioning of medical institutions.
In a number of European countries, Belarusian doctors can be offered a job according to a simplified procedure. Belarusian Minister of Health Dmitry Pinevich responds to the outflow of personnel by proposing that even more graduates of medical universities should be forcibly sent to work in designated institutions. There is also an idea to improve the equipment of hospitals so that doctors settle in their workplaces. In practice, though, young specialists are often not allowed to use modern and expensive devices.
Yes, medical equipment simplifies work and improves the quality of medical services, but doctors still need to simply earn money to be able to replace an old refrigerator with a new one and dress their children.
It's possible to improve the personnel situation in Belarus, and particularly Belarusian medicine, only by changing the entire political system. Meanwhile, the regime continues its repression. Psychiatrist-narcologist Maxim Zaitsev from Brest was detained for insulting Lukashenka. To this day, doctors remain political prisoners. Among them, there is Andrei Lubetsky, a well-known maxillofacial surgeon who was sentenced to 5 years in prison. In total, according to experts' estimates, since the protests in 2020, the Belarusian economy has lost more than 100,000 jobs.
Residents of an emergency building in the Russian city of Saratov are afraid that they are going to die under the rubble of their own house. The 5-story building, built in the 60s, turned into a real slum and was recognized as an emergency housing 5 years ago. But officials are in no hurry to resettle the residents despite the complaints filed to the head of the Russian parliament. Experts say that in a few years, a quarter of all the housing in the many Russian cities will be in such condition.
Saratov is a Russian city in the southeast of the European part of Russia, with almost 1 million inhabitants. And this is a typical 5-story building on the outskirts of the city, built back in the days of the Soviet Union, in the 60s of the 20th century, during the time of Nikita Khrushchev. Like thousands of Russian houses, it is already in a major state of disrepair. There is a heavy smell of sewage and dampness permeating the air. All the piping has long been corroded, and the basement is filled with water all year long. Concrete structures are falling apart, and the staircase is literally collapsing under your feet.
Look, this is where a child can fall down.
There has been no heating nor hot water in the building for several years. Disabled Tatiana Zhistakova never takes off her jacket and a hat. Nowadays, electric heaters save people, but they are afraid to even think about what will happen when a severe winter comes. In this area, it can be up to minus 30 degrees Celsius.
There are so many carpets to keep the floors warm.
Yes, touch it with your hands. Here's this one and this one. If this one is on, as they say, you can still walk, but it's generally icy here. Here, the electric heaters are on day and night. There is no central heating.
Experts recognized this house as a safety hazard and unsuitable for living 5 years ago. People complain everywhere. They even reached out to their deputy in the Russian State Duma. Vyacheslav Volodin heads the lower house of parliament and is an active supporter of the war in Ukraine. However, all complaints were forwarded back to the city administration. It is the mayor's office that should deal with the resettlement of dilapidated housing under the federal program, and there are hundreds of such houses in Saratov.
It is precisely because of the inaction of local and regional authorities that houses were not included in the program until 2017.
However, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has recently announced a new program to relocate people from dilapidated housing.
We talk about this all the time. People need to be rehoused from the slums, as I have already previously brought to my colleagues' attention.
Vladimir Putin has been making similar statements since 2008. But the number of dilapidated residential buildings in Russia, despite his words, continues to increase year by year. There is not enough money for such programs, and the regional state funds, which should be engaged in renovation, have been repeatedly accused of embezzlement and corruption. Since 2017 alone, 12 million square meters of housing have been declared unfit for habitation. This is about 280,000 standard one-bedroom apartments from the times of the USSR. According to official estimates, more than 1 million Russians live in dilapidated housing. Experts say that in the near future, 5-story buildings like this one will begin to collapse. In some Russian cities, such houses account for up to a quarter of all urban development. Russia is spending a lot of money on the war with Ukraine. Budget revenues are declining against the backdrop of Western sanctions. Therefore, it is difficult to see a solution to the problem of dilapidated housing in Russia, even in the very distant future.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Eastern Europe Review. We will be back next week with the news stories. I'm Alexandra Shapalina. Keep watching TVP World and see you next time.